As income investors, does net worth really matter? I'm going to go over that today. When it comes to things like portfolio allocation, NAV stability, are these things really important? The short answer is yes. In my opinion, it's very important. And I'm going to go over why, give you some of the reasons why not just looking at yield and income is really the way you should approach your investing style, but you also need to look at your net worth, and you want to grow your net worth over time. So when it comes to building this income portfolio with all these assets, many people have the goal of paying all their bills, being able to live at some point in the future or even currently off of their income investments. But once that's done, you cover all your expenses and you want to really look at your net worth and why it's important. I would say that most people, even people that are somewhat frugal, they want to splurge a little bit from now and then. They want to buy luxuries. They want to buy, what I would call status symbols. If you look at the cost of something that's a luxury, right? And so let me just kind of briefly define that, right? This would be something that you don't need. This could be that Gucci purse. It could be the new gadget, new phone. It could be a sports car. It could be traveling. It could be, dining at high-end restaurants, frequenting, high-end bars, that sort of thing. So, most people want some of that in their life, right? But when you look at the cost of those things, you always have to look at the percentage of it in comparison to your net worth and determine if, should I spend this money? It's not a need. It's not something that's, going to sustain me. It's just a want, a desire. And so when you look at everything in a percentage, right? Well, if you have a low net worth, even if it's generating income or yield, it's not really going to work for you when it comes to buying higher end and pricier luxury items or things you just don't need, right? Or even spending money like on experiences, like traveling. I'm going to give you some specific examples, and we're going to work with some numbers here and get kind of an idea of what I'm talking about. All right, so this example, let's say you have your eye on a Tesla Cybertruck. Now, the starting price currently is around 80,000 USD. This is a ballpark percentage. You can argue, well, vehicle is a need. In most places, depending on where you live, it's a need. It's not really a luxury. Well, I would argue that a percentage of that is a luxury because you don't need to, own a Cybertruck. You can get by with a used Toyota, right? So let's kind of break this down. If you, wanted to keep that cost that you're spending on something that is mostly a luxury, you would want to look at around, let's say, $80,000. 5% of 1,600,000 is $80,000. Okay, so if you're spending that on something that's not really a necessity, you're looking at 5% of your net worth. Is that, kind of high? I think so. I think it should probably be under 5%. So what kind of net worth would you be looking at, if you're someone who wants to be financially responsible and grow your wealth because you're not tying it up in, assets that are depreciating? Well, you would probably want to be a multimillionaire. You want multimillionaire status, a couple $1 million at least, and that's below 5%. Now, some people may say, well, I'd feel better at, 2% or 1%. that's fair. It all depends on the person, but this is just kind of like a ballpark figure. But let's say, your net worth, is much lower, and you go out and you buy this status symbol, or this luxury item that you don't really need, and it's like 40% of your net worth. Well, that's just a bad idea, right? You should not spend 40% of your net worth on something that's a luxury. Right? It's going to be, the reason I say that is it's going to be very hard to grow your wealth if you keep doing this, right? If you adopt that mindset in how you spend your money, right? Your relationship with money and how you invest. Now let's look at another example. So you'll probably remember, this was years ago, but Jay-Z went out and he bought bottle service. In one night, he spent $250,000. And, this got on the news, social media, and people were just upset about it, like, oh, what a waste of money. Why would he spend that much money on bottle service in one night? He could have given it to charity. When you look at the percentages, though, Jay-Z is a billionaire, right? Back then, maybe he wasn't worth $2.5 billion back then, but let's say he was worth close to $2 billion. Well, that amount that he spent in one night, 250,000 USD on bottle service, was only 0.0125% of his net worth. That's like me and you going to the local neighborhood bar and buying a few drinks, right? It's not financially irresponsible for someone with a huge net worth like that. So you always look at things as a percentage, when it's a luxury item, something you don't need, a status symbol, something like that, right? This is how you should approach everything. Now, if you're buying a Lamborghini, right, you should be worth millions and millions of dollars. Now, I haven't really calculated like what I think, my net worth should be if I go out and buy a Lamborghini Huracan. But I know just from, kind of spitballing and rounding up numbers, I would have to be worth a few million. Otherwise, it's just a bad idea. And you also have to look at the cost of everything too, right? Before you even walk on that lot, you should know, the maintenance, parts, tires, everything that's needed to maintain whatever you're purchasing. I know multiple people that bought, high-end sports cars, and they looked at the price and said, oh, I have that money, I can afford it. And when it came time to buy new tires, they couldn't afford it. They couldn't afford the tires because they didn't think about it. They didn't add that in to their calculation. Like, oh, I'm going to need this money, to keep this running and to buy new tires when the old ones get bald. Like, multiple people did that, and they had to get rid of their car because they couldn't afford tires. Okay, so you always have to consider all these things. Now, when it comes to me, I want to grow my net worth because there are luxuries that I want to buy with my money. Now, I'm not so big into like status symbols, but I really like experiences, right? And travel. Those are the things that I want to spend, most of my money on. And like if I look at the cost of a trip, I have to look at it in relation to my net worth. Well, if you have assets that are constantly going down in value, and your portfolio, which is part of your net worth, right? That's your assets. If it's going down, right, over time, well, that doesn't fare very well. If that's something you want to do, you want to blow more money, right? You want to spend more money kind of frivolously on things you enjoy or things you want to do, right? You can't just look at income. Income can be cut, right? It doesn't matter if it's a dividend, a distribution, even a career, a business, right? Income is not guaranteed. Income can be cut. You have to look at net worth. So if you're following somebody and they're an income investor and all they care about is their income and their yield, their distribution, like, that's a problem. I would not listen to someone like that because they're ignoring their net worth, right? And it makes it very difficult to grow your wealth. I assume if you're watching this video, you are someone who wants to grow your net worth. Well, these are things you have to take into account, right? You have to take into account assets that decrease in value or grow in value. So, currently my portfolio is about 40% in growth funds, right? Assets that grow over time that don't pay me. They don't pay me anything. So that's part of my strategy is, yes, I do want to grow my income over time, but as my income gets higher, I want to buy things that aren't necessities, that are luxuries, things I just want and don't need, like traveling, plane tickets, hotels, and all of that has to be, this reasonable percentage of my net worth. And you might be thinking, well, it's my money. I could spend it any way I want. You're right. You could spend it any way you want. And you're not going to do very well if you ignore this and you just look at, oh, well, this is my income and I could just spend it all and not look at your net worth, because it's going to make it very difficult to grow your wealth and you can get into financial trouble, right? Eventually that's going to catch up with you. So yeah, it's your money, but if you want to grow your wealth, then this is one thing that you're going to have to look at. You're going to have to look at, what are my assets worth? How much is my spending? And, if you're able to grow those things together, your income and your net worth, well, then you could buy the things that you want in the future. You might have to wait, right? You might have to wait for a while and have a little bit of restraint, but that's going to help you because that's going to change your relationship to money, because you're always going to look at money like, hey, this is like a certain percent of my net worth. It's okay if I spend it, even if it's quote unquote blowing it. And I always look at things as, hey, I could spend this $1,000 on, this pair of sunglasses I don't really need, but they look really cool, which actually I've thought about in the recent past. Or I could put that money into investments and I can yield this much or grow this much per year on average, right? So you start to look at things differently and your relationship with money changes. And when you do that, when your relationship with money changes, that's when you take your investing to the next level. The mentality, right, is what makes you wealthy or broke. Your mentality and your relationship with money is everything.